panelists for agreeing to spend a little time with us on this wonderful subject of hyperconnectivity. So, first of all, how do each of you think about delivering content everywhere? And anyone can start. John, you want to start?
Sure. Well, sort of two ways. First of all, we think about it in a situational respect. The consumer is trading off their device from when they get up into the morning to when they go to work to when they get home at night. And so first of all, we obviously want to be with that consumer as they increase their media consumption. Strategically, timing is very focused on making sure that we have content everywhere. And that's essentially, when you look at our magazine products, to making sure you have all access across print, digital, and what other emerging platforms you have. And so to that end, we've made a commitment to make sure that all of our digital magazines are on the iPad and on any platform by the end of the year.
Sean, very, very different company, Demand Media from Time Inc. How do you all think about it?
Yeah, I think we're similar in some respects and different in others. I mean, we own and operate our own network of destination websites, and some of those sites are extremely informative. Those are sites like ehow.com, and some of them are a little bit more social, like cracked.com, and some of them are more data intensive, like livestrong.com, which has an app called The Daily Plate. So we look at all of these emerging platforms as opportunities, but we really do look at the existing opportunities that are present today on the web for both text and video, and we try to make those trade-offs in terms of how we're allocating our capital based on where we think the market's going and also where the dollars are today.
Yeah, we're going to talk a little bit more about that in some depth in a few minutes. Jeff, how about my yearbook?
Yeah, so we optimize for the device the user has in their hand. So the way we think about that on the back end is essentially to create a series of APIs to be as agnostic to the device on the back end layer as possible, and then have all the work done on the UI in order to tailor it to the device they have in their hand. So you try to reduce costs that way, but I mean, in terms of delivering content everywhere, or delivering it everywhere, I mean, we also try to make use of whatever the unique characteristics are of the device. So if it has a GPS, we'll use it. If it has a camera, we'll use that. So.
Great, Mark.
Sorry. I think a little different. I mean, we do try to make our content available sort of anywhere and everywhere that people want to consume it, but I think maybe a little bit different than some of my colleagues. We're a little protective of sort of certain assets and maybe less protective of others. So when we think about clips or promotional content, we're certainly everywhere, anywhere. When we think about full episodes that we put out, it's not necessarily anywhere and everywhere. It's anywhere, everywhere that we can track, measure, and monetize appropriately for that type of content. So that's not necessarily every device all the time. The other concern that we have is security, that those episodes aren't being stolen and taken out there. And there are also certain devices that are better or worse at those things. So it's a mix, right? And we're trying, and things are evolving. I think as we move forward, there's going to be more opportunities to go further and farther with the, let's call it the crown jewels or more valuable assets that we put out.
So what happened to the sort of write once or produce once and distribute everywhere? Were we just completely off when we thought about that in terms of our ability to reach the right consumers? Is it absolutely necessary to reinvent content for all of our different devices and channels? What if we didn't do that?
We're not focused so much on recreating the content, because the reality is we can't. I mean, that would be way too expensive. But a perfect example is CNN Money, right? So the heavy hardcore data user or market data user, when we look at their usage on their mobile device, they are focused on business news and on the market data. So we make sure that we design that product for that consumer and the utility that they need throughout the day.
Which doesn't necessarily mean that you are recreating content. It may be that you carve out different content.
Exactly.
For different devices
we put a
and
specific,
audiences.
Exactly. And then when it comes to sort of our digital magazine apps, which are the paid products, the focus there is to have high design intent. And it's a high touch product when the editors are putting it out. They want to make it as beautiful as possible. So it's less about recreating the content, but adding to it and making it look beautiful.
Mm-hmm. What about others?
I think that's exactly, it's right. You have to right size the content for the audience, and that audience is different on different devices or different consumption platforms. And I'd say, secondly, this whole idea of, sort of write once, publish everywhere, it's a dream, right? I mean, we don't all have the systems to be able to do it properly. It's not like there's one mobile interface, you just push it once and it goes everywhere, right? So there's actually, the content may be the same, but the actual method to get it to each place in each way is incredibly different. And I don't want to say it's one-to-one, it's not, narrowcast, but it's certainly not the same thing as the broadcast business was, back in the day where you just push the button and it goes everywhere.
I mean, I think Apple happened, right? So it created this very proprietary platform where if you want to reach it, you have to play by their rules, and you have a big incentive to reach that audience.
Yeah.
So far, for sure. Do you think that will hold?
I think that's definitely going to. I mean, are you going to bet against Apple? I think the bet against Apple would be, is HTML5 ever really going to catch up? And we use HTML5. We use it for everything that isn't iPhone and Android. But Apple's going to continually put out. The next big thing to come is NFC, right? You're going to be buying at the point of sale. There's always going to be APIs that are available that HTML5 is going to be a little slower for. I think it's a hard argument to make that native experiences are parallel or on par with non-native experiences. They're not. Non-native experiences are inferior.
I want to get back to that HTML5 app issue in a second, but Sean?
Well, I would say that fragmentation happened too. I mean, if you thought that you were going to be producing for this mass audience and they didn't show up, if you didn't make money in the first window, you're certainly not going to make money in the other. So, we were fortunate to found a company in 2005, 2006. So we were really focused on that hyper-fragmentation and started really publishing at almost the lowest common denominator, which is how can we produce content and make money in one specific area, whether it was specifically it was web, and now we're fortunate enough to be able to leverage some of those assets differently, but leverage them still in other platforms.
So that makes a lot of sense. I think issues associated with larger established companies, like a Time Inc., certainly a CBS, different set of issues on their content area, whereas you were born, 5-6 years ago, have a kind of flexibility and nimbleness. You can kind of invent it as you go.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, but the flip side of that is the benefit that these guys have is they have great brands that people know.
They have great brands. They also have archives that can be enormously valuable to produce evergreen content. Obviously you can't do that at Time Magazine because the news is not evergreen. But certainly for many of your lifestyle brands, an InStyle or a Real Simple probably, there's the archival issue as well, which certainly has an effect on the economics.
And you'd almost be surprised because when you look at Time, prior to when I got there, the archive was behind a wall, and we found that our health and science articles didn't matter really how old they were. They had great lifespan, and people consistently bought them. So and even now with Fortune, we did an experiment where we took a Steve Jobs article and made it an ebook, and suddenly you can micro-publish very, very easily in this day and age and find new ways to monetize.
Yeah, that's a great one.
But video can be dated. That we've looked at that, and I've constantly looked at trying to acquire libraries, right? Because we have this distributed freelancer model. We produce and create an enormous amount of evergreen content. But I'm always on the lookout for cool libraries or things that, we actually did buy a library of golf videos a few years ago, which we plugged into our GolfLink website, which actually worked out pretty well. But that was a company that spent a lot of money developing these great HD videos, didn't have anywhere to distribute them, and then ultimately was just looking for a buyer. But what we've found is that on a unit economic basis, it is more often than not the case that it's cheaper to recreate it than actually extract stuff from the archives and then update it.
I think many companies have found that, although there certainly are verticals where you don't really need to recreate it. They literally are evergreen. I think particularly on some basic how-to. So I think that's definitely an advantage. But digitizing all of the archival content can also be an economic killer. So
yeah, agreed.
Well, it also depends on the monetization you're getting on that content and how valuable that content is in the audience that it drives, right? So if it's how-to videos that there are 20,000 other versions of the same thing, you're obviously not going to get the monetization you do on a classic television series, for example, that it's not replicable, right? Fans are fans of what it is and they want to watch it. So.
But then you clearly haven't seen our new meat grilling series with Josh Ozersky.
I clearly haven't.
That's one of a kind.
Got to look that up. Let's go back to the HTML5 app question, because I think, this is one of the most interesting conversations, I think, maybe more cocktail party than necessarily data-driven or substantive. But I think it is a great question. Will we, in fact, become an app nation, or do you think HTML5 really holds the promises that many think it does?
Someone said to me, apps are to mobile web as CD-ROMs were to the web, right? I think, look at the FT. A lot of folks are creating very, very compelling applications that aren't taking advantage of iOS or of Android. And I think that's the way it's going. Every app we seem to build now has a larger component that's partly HTML5 based, so we can update it very easily, and part of it takes advantage of the systems of the iOS. I really do think we're going to go much more towards, I even heard Denise from the New York Times say that they're making a big bet on HTML5, so I think you'll see most publishers, because at the end of the day, to your point around data, we can control the consumer channel and have a direct relationship with those consumers. The only downside is that we take ourselves out of that ecosystem that Apple's created, which is pretty powerful in that marketing.
Jeff, you asked the question, so where do you come out on this?
I mean, I think you got to pursue them all simultaneously. I think you got to have an HTML5 experience, because there's plenty of phones out there that aren't iPhone or Android. But at least in our experience, we went from 2% of our users on mobile to start 2010 to 44% of our daily active users.
Say it again, 44%?
44%.
2% to 44 in how many years?
A year and a half. And it's all on, it's 85% iPhone and Android, and it's Android 2 to 1. I think something that's often missed is if you do have an HTML5 app, that's great, and you probably should in any event, but the odds, 25% of our new users are coming from people discovering the application in the market, the Android market, or the Apple App Store, right? And so if you didn't have an app, you'd be leaving 25% of the new users behind.
For sure.
I mean, I think a lot of, how many apps out there really need the native computing power of the device right there on the it's few. It's mostly gaming apps. It's not most of the stuff that we up in this panel produce, right? Our video player to play a full episode of Two Broke Girls or Two and a Half Men doesn't need the native computing power of the device to make it work. It can play over the web, but Apple has created this marketplace that you need the promotional heft of in order to get people to be aware of your application. Maybe. I mean, I think brands like ours and Time may have some other things to say about how we promote those things, but Apple has created that marketplace. There is there is activity there. We do want to gain that marketing benefit, so it does say something about how you have to do it purely to get listed in the directory rather than for any technical reason. So we can have a technical discussion of whether this works or that works, or we can just break it down to what it really is, which is a business issue.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen a lot of success with our Daily Plate app with Livestrong, but I think what's a little bit different and unique about that is it really is two-way in the sense that consumers are using that to input and track calories. So it's really almost enabling us to create this massive food database that we can then leverage across the website. So it's not necessarily an app that's made for just passive consumption of content, like a lot of great content apps are. The users are providing us with all of this information and data that we can then use and leverage to build a great economic case, really just a great business off the back of it.
Okay, because this good track for discussion, because I think that the issues associated with creating and distributing content across many different channels, there are serious economic implications here, and I think it would be great for the audience to understand some of the things that you all do to manage costs or to rein them in. So, Sean, can you just give an example of how you might use some of that data from Daily Plate and use that sort of as leverage? Can you give a specific example?
Yeah, I mean, I think I know we've worked on a couple of projects with a number of packaged goods companies. I think one in particular was, Dole bananas. I think we had recognized that one of the most tracked foods consumed was banana. And so we were able to take a lot of this data, geographic data, consumption data, and package it up and work with Dole to create an interesting marketing package that they could. And then, of course, we had the inventory to be able to deliver that package on a website that has sufficient scale. So you kind of have to be able to bridge those two worlds. You've got this really interesting, innovative idea and concept, and then own enough of the distribution so that the economics make a lot of sense.
So anybody else have some tips for folks looking to manage costs? And how do you spread some of these costs against, or use some of these resources across channels? Jeff?
Well, one of the things we do is, so for devices that are an iPhone, Android, iPad, there's something out there called Phone Gap that allows you to go cross-device using an HTML5 framework, which is pretty interesting. Something else out there called IUI, which I believe is Google, and that is useful for reaching all devices. The way we use it is to reach all devices that aren't iPhone or Android.
Which is about 15% of the
which is about 15%
market.
at the moment, but potentially could grow faster than that.
We have so many brands, and the inclination is to want to build your own and build it first and build it your way. But we've made a lot of effort to, first of all, make sure that we have a process for greenlighting apps, so that to make sure that we understand what's going on across the organization. Secondly, we've built an in-house team that shares technology across all the publications.
So that's a centralized. Do you have several centralized divisions, departments?
Sure. So we have one central IT team, but each of the individual web properties have their own developers. So what we'll do is we do have right now, because it's still new, we sort of outsourced a lot of our apps to begin with. Now we've built an in-house capability. And so one perfect example is, Entertainment Weekly built an app called the Must List app. And a year later, the folks at Golf created one called the Front Nine and used the basic same underlying technology and framework to launch their app. So it didn't take a lot. They didn't have to rebuild it from scratch. So we're trying to leverage as much technology as possible. At the same time, when you have some of the bigger brands launching utility apps, it's harder to replicate that across all brands.
So the sharing then is not accidental, because it's basically the way the organization is structured.
Absolutely.
And what about another large company like a CBS?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say the key things to share are things like ad serving technology or delivery of the content, meaning we have a universal video player across all of CBS Interactive, things like that. I think it's that front end or the app-based experience that has to be individualized for the brand. And so while we have a dozen brands or so that we distribute and market under, each of those experiences is going to be slightly different. So you are leveraging the things you can, the things that should be central, but you do have to measure that these things are individual. And frankly, those front end experiences are not, I don't want to say they're not expensive, but they're not. If you had to build the blood and guts every time, yes, it would be super expensive. But to build the front end piece of it each time, it isn't the huge problem. I think as you start to get into things like gaming applications or things like that, those are always going to be specialized and very difficult to replicate. And frankly, for us, on a show-by-show basis, they're not all going to be the same app, right? They're not all going to be the same second screen experience. They're not all going to be the replicable that way. So we have to be
just to give some perspective on, we have 50 engineers and a dozen are mobile, but that that will probably be 20 by the end of the year. So we're definitely over investing in mobile, but I agree that the
Maybe not.
Oh no, not over investing versus the opportunity versus the other versus the web.
Are the rest of the panelists over-investing as well in mobile, or would you say from an infrastructure and staffing standpoint?
Just from an infrastructure perspective, I think we are still evaluating that market. I mean, we like to follow the money. We're not necessarily the first ones to follow the audience necessarily, but we wanted to see how the economics play out before we really go in and drive an initiative. So I think we've made the right amount of investments in mobile. We have a cracked app, we have the Daily Plate app. We're just trying to think about how what we can build that is unique and engaging and do it at the right economic trade-off for us.
For us, I think when you look at where the high growth areas are for display advertising, mobile's there. It's clearly a scale play right now. That said, we are seeing unbelievable audience growth across all of our mobile web properties, and each property is a little bit different. But we're putting dedicated mobile sellers in place on some properties. We're definitely building mobile product management teams. Some have dedicated mobile developers. It really depends on where the life cycle is for the individual brand. But for the bigger brands, there's definitely dedicated people against it. And I wouldn't say we've overinvested. In fact, I think we probably could have been a little bit more aggressive in sort of this last year.
We're sure not seeing monetization though. From a mobile standpoint, it's seemed to be one of the longer waiting games in the industry. So if you look, for example, at people say, okay, what's really going on out there? What are the most important things? almost anybody would answer, local mobile social, right? And yet, look at where we're not from a monetization standpoint. We are so far from understanding how to commercially message within a social environment. I don't think we've figured out how to monetize within the mobile environment either. So that's why, sort of the investment and then looking at this return, we're still a bit of ways.
I think Sean, you hit it on the head. It takes scale, right? You're not selling every ad package at $10, right? I mean, it's sort of, you need to have that scale, and if that mobile component of it isn't driving enough scale, it's very hard to sell, a sponsorship package around something like that. So I think there's a bit of having that market have scale, and also having, as companies, the ability to sell scale around it, right? So as you said, maybe you're selling that as a component of a larger campaign, and that works much, much better. And I think just to throw something in on the social side, I'd say it's not so much necessarily about selling social or about selling that as a package, but understanding what social is doing to each piece of your business, whether it be traffic driving or driving. I mean, we found last week, which was a record request in traffic with Premiere Week and everything like that, huge amounts of traffic coming from social media. I mean, millions and millions of session starts coming there. It was probably our number 1 or number 2 driver of session starts for the week, which if you go back 3 years, it was not even on the map. So, put that in perspective of how you use social. It's not necessarily the way to sell and package, but it's certainly a way to drive.
Yeah, I mean, I love the way you phrase that question. Local, mobile, social. It's almost like you'd be a stock analyst, like every public company is. These are our big initiatives, right? And for us, we have really probably overweighted social in terms of thinking about those core areas. We bought a company called RSS Graffiti recently, which is really like a Facebook publishing platform. And what they also had was just this great group of engineers and engineering talent that's going to allow us to build this central data platform purely for social. Because when we created this company, we used a lot of data that was coming from the search platform. So we always think about understand the distribution first and then build the business case around it. So for us, we were trying to understand what people were searching for, what they were looking for on the web. That led to this creation of Demand Studios, which is our intent-driven production model. We've got a bunch of freelancers that create that content. For us to be able to evolve as a company, we need to be able to do the same thing in the social world. So understand what kind of data is being made available to you, and then how do you utilize that data to change your publishing process so that you can reach that huge audience that's sort of spending time playing games on Facebook. I mean, that for me is one of the biggest opportunities we all have today as publishers.
Yeah, I underscore that point. So I mentioned 44% of our activity is on mobile, but it's 8% of the monetization. And I think it's a function of a few things, but one is just the ad format, right? Most mobile ads are this 300 by 50 or 320 by 50 unit, which is kind of like the old 468 by 60. Most mobile advertising is direct response. It's which isn't so different in kind of the early days of the web. So I think we're just early.
But just to throw the scale argument back out there, it's the idea. Let's take Survivor, for example, where Sprint is our major sponsor. We have a social game, we have a mobile component, we have an online component. When you can sell across those different media, it's a different ballgame, right? It's not that you're sitting there saying, well, there's this little slice of mobile that I can sell, or a little piece of social because I have this one thing. It's the ability to sell a package that goes around there, and the ability for them to sponsor that package and be able to reach all those different pieces of the audience that either want to watch that piece of content or that brand.
Well, I think also to help the marketer and the agency understand the mix and the impact of one channel on another. Still a little bit away from that as well, but it's kind of the point of the exercise. So what about some of the other emerging platforms? Whoever thought a car was going to be a platform? And what about connected appliances, interactive appliances, refrigerators that keep track of your goods in there and tell you when to reorder? And how do you make investment decisions about some of these new platforms? I mean, you talked about the investment in mobile, but what about some of the things coming up? How do you think about this?
we really try to fail fast and fail cheaply. And the reality is that we're gonna have to make some bets. I look at the investment we're making now for our digital magazines. It'll pay off in the future, but it's a bet we have to make now and an investment we have to make now. But Time recently decided it was going to experiment and build a TV app for Samsung, and launched I want to say it's a month ago now, and it's in the thousands of downloads, which totally caught us off guard. We never thought that many people would actually interact with Time content on a Samsung TV, but it's been, I think, enormously successful from a launch perspective, and it's the idea of.
Do you reserve a part of your investment budget for new platforms or experimentation?
We actually don't, but it's opportunistic. When we see, I sort of harken back to, I emailed someone before I came here and I said, when did Time launch its Twitter feed? And it was August 2008 when, it was growing, but it didn't have the traction it had today. And, people were still at that point saying, well, what is this medium? Should we be playing it? And the point is that we have to experiment and we have to make some bets. And if we can do it as inexpensively as possible and learn through it, then we're going to take that chance.
Sean, what about demand? How do you make those kinds of investment decisions?
Well, we have a chief innovation officer named Byron Reese, who's a very big thinker, and we acquired his business. He started a company called Expert Village. It was in Austin, Texas. And he, once a month or once a quarter comes out and talks to the executive team about emerging platforms. Sometimes they seem crazy, but he always has a prototype built. I don't know how he does it, but he builds these things that actually work for 5 minutes or 10 minutes. And everybody gets excited about them. And then we take some time and we think about it. And usually the ones that you just kind of keep coming back to are the ones that we spend a lot of time thinking about. And then the ones that sort of rise to the top are the ones that get the money.
Well, what about at CBS? How do you make these decisions?
Look, I think it's a mix. The example I'll use is that we don't like to go out there and experiment all over the place with our content and throw it against a lot of different startups or experimental ideas, because frankly we have a huge promotional sort of juggernaut to put behind something, and if we were to sort of make a home run that's on something that wasn't really ours, wasn't our technology, have we really made a good bet there, or have we actually made the thing more popular than it could have been? But we do like to dabble, we do like to test on certain pieces and try to find the right places to use the content. I'll give you an example. On Monday, our star of 2.5 Men, Ashton Kutcher, is going to do a live chat via a company that he's an investor in called Tiny Chat, where he'll video chat with all of the fans that want to watch the show with him. We're certainly willing to make that experiment around one of our stars, around one of our pieces of content that we think can actually drive performance for the show, whereas if all those different connective pieces weren't there, we might not take that experiment. So we're a little bit of a wait and see on most of the smaller things, but we're testing them in the background and trying not to trying to be cautious.
Yeah. Now, the only other thing I wanted to add, just in terms of what I think a lot of companies need to do to be able to capitalize on some of those innovation ideas, is to be good at acquiring talent, be good at picking up small companies. Maybe a little bit self-serving since I run acquisitions, but we as a company we've bought 35 or 40 different websites and businesses over the course of our career. And we are constantly looking for things that just sort of emerge and get some traction. We bought this little application called Cover It Live, which is a great app that a lot of companies, ESPN and almost everybody else, uses to cover live events. It's just this very viral application, and it gets us a foot in the door in terms of live media and live coverage. But those are that has historically been for us one of the ways that we've been able to innovate.
Great. We have about 5 minutes left and want to have time for a couple of audience questions, but I have one last question. What does it mean to advertisers? Speaking of monetization, what do all these devices, multiple devices that consumers use, is this good, bad, and different for advertisers? What does it really mean?
I think it's a good thing, right? I mean, as a result of it, they're always plugged in, they're always on. And as a result, there's a much greater reach from just being constantly connected.
There's reach. Is there connection?
Yeah,
very
absolutely.
Different.
So and also by being always on, you essentially have more context because you have a lot more data about the user. Where are they located? Potentially, what is their camera seeing? Who are their friends? So I think you have a lot better reach and you have a lot better context. And I think both of those create opportunities.
I mean, I had a friend tell me years ago to get out of the television business because, fragmentation was coming. You used to find 1 or 2 ways to make money, and now it's going to be 50, and you're screwed, and you should just leave and do something more simple. But obviously, I didn't do that. But look, fragmentation isn't a dirty word, right? It's not, it's harder. It makes business a little different, but it does create the opportunities to reach audiences in very specific ways, and therefore deliver them a message in a very specific way that is potentially, as you said, more interactive and creates an opportunity to create a deeper connection with the audience. Look, nobody's going to deny that millions and millions of people watch television shows 10 to 15 feet away with a remote control in their hand without a lot of interactivity and love it, and we love that as well. But there's also millions and millions of people that now do it in an interactive fashion with lots of other content around it and do more with it, and that's potentially either equally or more valuable than the first interaction. So,
Well, so what's on your mind? What do you think? A few questions from the audience? So how do we package up these offerings across channels for advertisers? So intelligent integrated marketing programs. Who's doing that within your companies, and who's buying them? If this is such a great thing for advertisers, why don't we feel like we've done a great job on creating integrated programs that really are intelligent marketing versus bundled media assets that drive down pricing? Anybody having great success on the cross-channel front?
I think that we're seeing that more and more. I think what's going to set us apart, we're not a portal, right? And what sets us apart from the really huge scale plays is the fact that we offer really custom programs for our clients. And to your point around integration, BMW came to us and they wanted to reach this really high-level, influential business decision maker, and we put them in one of our biggest franchises, Fortune's Executive Dream Team, and that had a print component, which was the in-book edit. We built something out online, which was essentially it allows the users to create their own dream team and create a bracket. We extended it to mobile, and it was truly a 360 program across all the media that we reach, and at scale, because we have many people on each one of those platforms. And they bought it because it did provide them that fully integrated experience, and they were very, very happy with it, and it was very successful.
Do you feel that CBS is doing a good job there, or miles to go?
Look, it's early days is the way I would describe it, is that the amount of robust products we have on a either show by show or platform by platform basis is just at the beginning, right? I mean, part of the reason I've only been in the job for 90 days, and part of the reason I took it was the opportunity to go build out all those potential experiences. But with the ones we've had and the ones we've been able to package together on an appropriate basis for an advertiser or against a specific show or things like that, it's tremendously powerful, right? Because you're able to give an advertiser that depth of product with something that they understand and the audience that they understand. So I think there's, the future's bright, and I think we're doing a good job today.
But we're just at the beginning. So thank you very, very much. Really appreciate all of you being here this afternoon.